record on this computer. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to work on lesson 4, which covers layers. One of the oldest features of Photoshop, and to this day, still probably one of the most important. You'll see on the left, I have the finished version, and on the right, I have our start version, and they give us a lot of components to that start version. We will be adding to them or modifying existing elements. For example, there's the postage stamp. Here's an image of the text, Hawaii. It's not the editable text, but we will be adding a gradient and an outline to that. You'll see that we have the flower in the upper right-hand corner, and we will be adding a drop shadow and making some, adding some layer filters to that. And here we have the pineapple. We'll be adding some text, and you'll notice that we have some other images that aren't in here, namely the flower in the lower left-hand corner and the image of the beach that we'll be adding to this. So we're going to build from the ground up, from the bottom up. Before I do, though, I want to go over, I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. And I know it's very small, that you will probably not be able to see it all that well. But I want to, let's pull this down so you can begin to see what layers is all about. So if we look at the top left-hand corner, this is really small. I don't think I can make it bigger. I wish I could, but I can't. So that may be a problem for some of you. If we look in the upper left-hand corner, we can view all of these objects by kind, layers by kind. You can view them by name. You can view them by effect or mode or attribute or color, smart object. And right now, if I select any of these other than what I have here, you won't be able to see anything because we haven't added anything other than the kind of layers. Over to the right, you can filter for pixel layers. You can filter for adjustment layers. You can filter for type. So if right now we just have a handful of layers, and it enables you to isolate and layers into different groups if you wish. So that's what these do. Here, if we select any one of these layers, you can, let's select this one right here. I'll turn it on, for example. You'll notice that the flower that I have here in the upper right-hand corner is selected as a normal layer. But if I click and I hold down on that, you'll notice that there's a lot of other options for me to choose from to get different effects. And sometimes they're really useful, and sometimes they do nothing, and sometimes they do nothing at all. You know, I mean, they don't, in fact, they look kind of weird. But all of these different layer types that we have here, modes, are non-destructive, so we can use them at will. And you can always turn them off and go back to the normal version, and we're good to go. I'm going to turn that back off for the time being. Also, when you select a layer, we can adjust its opacity from here. And again, I want to repeat, all of these features are non-destructive. You can lock layers from here. I can lock the transparency. I can lock the image pixels. I can lock the position of a layer. I can prevent auto nesting. I can also, with this little lock symbol, lock the entire layer. And again, these can be turned on and turned off. Fill is similar to opacity. I almost never use it. Instead of fill, I just use opacity and change it so that it's a lighter version of what I need. Okay, and the lower left-hand corner, we see, you might see a if you look carefully on your screen, you'll see a little link here. That allows us to link layers together. For example, if I double click on the background layer and turn it into layer 0, and I hold down the Shift key or the Command key and select the pineapple layer with that layer, I can link those two together. And you'll see that a little link symbol pops up. So now if I move them, they both move together. If I resize them or I do anything with them, they function as a single unit. And you can always undo that as well by just clicking on the link symbol again. We can also select an individual layer or multiple layers, and we can add what are called layer effects to them, which we will be doing. For example, adding drop shadows. That's probably one of the most prominent ones, maybe bevel and emboss, things like that. The next one over is that we will be doing a lot of, not necessarily in this exercise, but we're going to add what is called a layer mask. That will be in the upcoming lesson that we'll cover next week. And I'll talk about a little bit later. The next one is we can add adjustment layers from here. It's kind of a throwback to the way that you had to add adjustment layers back in the day. Now it's just over in the panel to the right. These are the same adjustment layers that are down here. If you wish to group layers into separate folders, you can do that from here. So that's adding a new folder, and you just simply click and drag elements into that folder. And if you want to get rid of any of these elements, you just click and drag and throw them in the trash. If you want to add a layer, then you click on this little button right here. So that's how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put these back in here. And I'm going to move that over. So that's the dominant one. And this is always up. I always have the layers panel visible. Okay. So one of the first things that they want us to do, let's look to the finished product for help here. They want us to add these little clouds in the background here. Well, I could add it to layer 0, but again, I caution you against that. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new layer, or I'm going to copy the layer. That would probably be better yet. So I always have that background layer that I can turn back on. And so that will become my background. And what I want to do with the foreground color is, instead of black, I'm going to pick this kind of blue from over here. Let's see if I can't select it from here. And it won't allow me to do that. So I don't know why. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to go to, I'm going to bring this up here. And let's go ahead and let's try that again. Is it bringing it over? It's not allowing me to do that. Why? It should. Well, then I'm just going to click and drag inside the color picker. And I'm going to pick a nice intense kind of blue, a nice cerulean blue here. Okay, try to match what they have over there so that it becomes my new foreground color. So that's what you need to do first. You need to create a foreground color and leave white as your background color. And I may have them reversed, I don't know. But hold on one second here. There we go. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to add digital clouds to this background layer here. And if it's easier for me to turn off the pineapple while I'm doing that, so I can see more clearly what I'm doing, I can do that. And now what I want to do is I want to go up to filter, and I want to go to render. And what I'm going to select under the render tab, that's under filter, render. This is the only place that you can do this, are clouds. And there you go. So I have some cloud patterns. Now, if you don't like those cloud patterns, you can always go to filter and hit Shift Command F again. So Shift Command F, and it will, I don't want to fade it. I want to go back to filter, and I'm going to clouds again, and it gives me a slightly different pattern. So my key command was wrong. And when you're happy with that pattern, then you're done. It's a nice little effect. It doesn't work in every instance. Sometimes the digital clouds don't look quite right, but you know, they look artificial. But in this particular instance, because most of the clouds will be covered up, they work just fine for us. Okay. So the next step that we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enhance the pineapple here. And there are various ways of doing that. And again, you want to do that in a non-destructive way. So I'm going to come up here with a finished version to show you what I'm doing. And I'm going to hold down the Option key and I'm going to click on the pineapple so that just both of these pineapples are visible. Now you'll notice with one pineapple, the bottom pineapple selected, it looks nice. But if I turn on the pineapple layer above it, you'll notice that the colors look much more vivid and bright, and they've been enhanced considerably. Now, the way that we can do that is quite simple. So I'm going to go ahead and turn, let me undo some of these so we can go back to bring everything back into that final file. And I'm going to bring this down here. And what I want to do for our project is I'm going to take the pineapple layer and I'm going to make a copy of it. So I can either do that by hitting Command J, or I can click and drag it on the new layer, and that will automatically make a copy of it. Now, enhance that to make the colors look even more vivid, you know, by copying the layer, it makes an exact copy on top of one another. This is a good example of when you can change from normal to dissolve, to darken, to multiply. And notice as I hover over each of these, it affects the underlying pineapple layer. Okay, so what we want to enhance and to make the colors much more vivid is overlay. Soft light is very similar. Overlay, in this particular instance, darkens it even a little bit more and gives it, you know, probably better contrast. So that's what we're going to do there. So that's the next step. So we've taken a good photograph of a pineapple. We've copied it because we want the colors to become a little bit more vivid, brighter. And on that layer, we've taken under mode, we've switched from normal to overlay. And again, as you drag over each of these, you can see what effect they have to the underlying layer. And maybe you want more of a posterized or kind of effect. So maybe hard mix would be the one that you would want to use for your particular solution. In this particular instance, though, we're going with overlay, and that's what we're going to stick with. So the next thing, we should probably turn on the flower layer here, because what I want to do before I enhance the flower, I'll do that in a minute, but I want to bring over this image of the beach. So what I can do, I already have it opened, and here is our beach photograph right here. Okay. So there are a couple of ways that you can bring images together in Photoshop. And there is an easy way, and there's, I won't say a hard way, but if I select all of this, if I hit Command A and I hit Command C for copy, I can go back to my start file and I can hit Command V for paste. And that just puts it in there like so. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it that I prefer to use is that if I go back to the beach scene, I don't need to select it at all. Just make sure that I have the correct layer selected if I'm on a file with multiple layers. And then I use the Move tool and I drag it up to the file that I want to combine it with, and then drag back down and release. So that's another way that you can do that. And you'll notice that because I had the last layer that I had selected was the pineapple copy layer, that it automatically inserted it directly above that one. So if you want to move the layer up or down in the stacking order, you can do that a couple of different ways too. So if I wanted to move it above the flower, I could click on the layer and I could drag it above the flower. So now it's above. I can also drag it below. And another way of doing that too is to hit the Command key, and you can hit either the left or the right bracket key to move it up or down. The left and the right bracket keys are just to the right of the P key. So if I hit the right one, notice that it moves it up. If I hit the left one, it moves it back down. So either way, sometimes if you have your mouse in hand, you can just click and drag and move it up or down if you've accidentally put it on the wrong layer or in the wrong order. But you can always rearrange these. Okay, it's very easy. And that would be my recommendation with whatever project you're working on. As I say, I really emphasize working non-destructively. And to do that, you typically want to isolate different parts of your image into smaller images and keep them on separate layers so that you can always go back and tweak or revise if it doesn't pan out for you. So now the next thing that we want to do is, you'll notice it's a little bit too big. So we need to reduce it in size. We need to rotate it. And you also may notice that there is a little white border around that. And again, all of these features that we're doing here, all of these things that I'm doing to this are non-destructive. So the first thing that we want to do is to resize it and rotate it. So we've already used this tool before, and it's the free transform tool. So I want to make sure that I have the correct layer selected. Maybe before I do that, I might want to rename the layer. So if you double click on the text, it allows me to edit that. So I will call it beach scene. You can rename any of these, layers, any way you want to. So with the beach scene now selected, I'm going to hit Command T. And now if I hold down the Shift and the Option key, and then move over a corner, it will resize it from the center, and it will maintain the correct proportions. Then if I move outside of it, and this is what we did with the little screws and that sort of thing in lesson 3, it allows me to rotate it. So now I can rotate it slightly, put it in a position. I can continue to move it if I want, just a little bit, like so. Move it over just a little bit. And you can always, because it's on its own layer, I can always size it up again. I can always rotate it again, and I'm good to go. So now I can go ahead and I can hit the check, or I can hit the return key, and that fixes it. Now what I want to do is I want to put a white border around it. So at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and we're going to introduce layer effects. And those two are non-destructive. They can continue to be edited as long as you want. Where you will find that is down here under the FX. And I'm going to scroll up here. And what I want to do is add a stroke to that particular layer. A little dialog box pops up. And you can see that the default color is black. I'm going to change that to white. And you can see already a very subtle little line has been added. So I'm going to adjust the size to that. We'll make it maybe 3-4 pixels, like so. And then you can decide whether you want the position of the line on the inside of the image, the outside of the image, or for it to be centered on that image. You can also adjust the opacity of the stroke that's around it. So I'm going to put it centered. For this particular project, it really doesn't matter whether it's inside or outside or centered. And I'm going to click OK, leave it white, like so. And then you'll notice in the layers panel, directly beneath the beach scene, we have effects that have been added to this. It's layer effects. And remember, to each layer, you can add an effect, or a single effect, or multiple effects. In this particular case, we've only added one. We added the stroke. And at any time you can turn it off. You can also double click on that effect and bring up the dialog box again and edit it again as much as you want. If you have multiple effects on a layer and you want to turn them all off, you can always do that from here as well. So there's the next thing that we've added. We added an image, we adjusted its size and rotated it, and we added a layer effect to it to apply a stroke to the outside of that photograph. The next step I think that would be worthwhile doing would be to go ahead and to adjust this flower in the upper right-hand corner a little bit. It's already positioned pretty much the way we want it, but you'll notice in the final version, a drop shadow has been added. So let's add that, and they've also added a color effect a little bit. So if I select the final version, I can go ahead and I can scroll up here, and you can see that the satin has been added and the drop shadow. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add satin and drop shadow. So I'm going to come back over here, make sure that the correct layer, the flower layer, is selected. Under effects, I'm going to go ahead and come down here, and it's at the very bottom. I'll add drop shadow. A little dialog box pops up. And again, I have multiple effects that I can add now. I'm going to go ahead and change the opacity to maybe 75, 80%. I can adjust the angle a little bit. And now what I want to do is I want to adjust the distance. I want to adjust the spread just a little bit. And the size. And let's go ahead and change the distance back just a little bit. Let's see how mine compares with theirs. We can go ahead and adjust the opacity just a little bit. So mine comes close. I'm not paying attention to their effects, the specific numbers that they dial out in the textbook, but that's, you know, what we want to do. So we're set to go. Mine looks pretty close to theirs. The other effect I said is the Satin Finish. So while this dialog box is up, I can click on Satin. Okay, and you can see that multiply right now has been selected. I can adjust the opacity for this, and that's probably what I want to do. So it's just, you know, very subtle. Okay, I can adjust, let's see what else. I can adjust the distance and the size, and that theirs is considerably brighter. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust this a little bit, and the size. And let's see what we have here. I can change the mode of this. If I select overlay, soft light, how about vivid light? Vivid light gives me a pretty close approximation to what they have. So again, follow the, you know, as I change the opacity, notice how that dramatically changes everything. Maybe 10% would be good here. But again, it brightens up the flower without doing permanent damage to it. So that will be the next thing that we do. Maybe the next thing that we want to do is let's go ahead and take the postage, Hawaii, and I'm going to go ahead and use the move tool and move it into position. So, whoops, wrong layer. Got to make sure that I have it right. Make sure that postage is selected before I move it, and then I can move it. Whoops, come on, come on, come on. Let's try again. Postage. I got to make sure I'm clicking on that layer for it to work. And if I don't have it, there we go. If you're not directly on the layer itself, it's going to move any other layer underneath. So maybe if you want, you know, it might behoove you to lock the layers as you work with them so that you don't inadvertently change things that you want left alone. On the other hand, remember you always have Command Z for multiple undos that are available to you. You also, under this tab right here, you have a history panel. So here's the history of what we've done so far, and you can always go back in time and select any point in time and continue from there. we'll talk about that on a later date. But you'll notice back to the postage postmark here, you'll notice that it's much darker in its original form and it looks much lighter in the finished version that we have. That's just simply taking the opacity and adjusting it a little bit until it matches the finished version. So we'll take it down to maybe 30%, and we'll be good to go. So we're moving along pretty swimmingly with this thing. Okay. So one of the next things that we want to do is we want to take the non-editable text that they provided for us. And let's scroll to that. Let's turn that back on. And that's the word Hawaii. And what we want to do is we want to apply a gradient to it. Now, I could apply it directly to that layer. I don't recommend that you do that. I recommend that we create a blank layer on top of it so that if we decide at any point in time we don't want the gradient, or we want to change the gradient, or we want to do something else with it, we can always turn it off. Because if I fill this particular layer, it will be a permanent change. So either you need to duplicate the layer, or you just simply need to create a new layer. And that's the one that we're going to work on. So let me go ahead and name that gradient so I know what, label it so I know what it is. Okay. Now, if I come over to my tool bucket here, and underneath it, if I select the gradient tool, it's going to pick the foreground and the background color. So what I need to do now is I need to pick a nice orange for this. And I can do that by clicking on the foreground color and picking an orange. That would be one way of doing it. I can also come back in here and I can use the color picker over here. I can put in RGB colors or CMYK colors. So let's go ahead and select a nice bright orange for that. I should also have swatches. So here is a series of swatches. Let me go ahead and I'll pick a nice bright orange from there. And I'm going to select from the orange to a white for my gradient. Now, the way that you use the gradient tool is that you click and you drag. But notice that it filled the entire layer. That's not what I want. I only want it to fill within the text itself. So I hit Command Z to undo that. To fill just the image of the text, what I do is I hold down the Command key or the Control key if you're on the PC and click on the little icon in the layer panel. And you'll notice that it brings up the little marching ants. It automatically knows, because that's the only thing on that layer of what needs to be selected. So oftentimes that's a very nice way of quickly making a selection, in addition to what we've learned on lesson 3. So now that I have just the text selected here, now I can go ahead and I can apply the gradient. And if I want it to go the entire distance, I can hold down the Shift key to lock that, and I can go do that. And I've filled my text halfway with that gradient, and that looks pretty good. If you don't like it, undo. And if I just go part way and I hold down the Shift key to constrain the movement, notice that it only fills it part way. If I hold down the Shift key and I click and I drag and I go beyond, notice that it fills it, the gradient beyond the selection that's there. So I'm going to go back a couple of steps. No, let me go back again. There we go. So I'm going to bring that up and I'm going to go just almost the full distance. There we go. So now we have a gradient. Now the next part of this is similar to what we did with the photograph. We want it outlined. So what we're going to do to this layer, or I'll deselect, we can actually add it to the Hawaii layer because it will be non-destructive. But remember, since I did the gradient on its separate layer, I can always turn that off. And I can start fresh without having destroyed the Hawaii layer. So let's select the Hawaii layer and let's go to Effects. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a stroke to this. All right. Now, instead of white is my color, I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to, let's click. Do I have something there? No. Let's go back up here. Let's bring all of these back up and I'm going to pick a green from here. So they want kind of a nice bright green. That looks pretty good. It's pretty close. Close enough for government work, right? So again, you know, you have to decide, do you want it centered? Do you want it on the inside, the outside? How thick do you want it? So let's boost that up a little bit. Let's also, rather than centered, let's put it on the outside. And that looks like it fattens it up considerably when I do that. So maybe I don't need it quite so fat. Let's take that down a notch, maybe to 4 pixels. And that's a pretty close match. So I'm good to go. I'll go ahead and go with that. So we're set. We've done one more thing now. We've taken a nice type choice that looks sort of like something you would see in Hawaii. And we've embellished it by adding a gradient. And we've added an outline to it. Remember that both of those effects are non-destructive. I can always turn off the stroke. I can always turn off that gradient layer and I'm back to where I started. Okay. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Oops, I don't want that. Why isn't it turned? There we go. Turned it back on. So the next step, we can do one of two things. I can probably work on the flower and bring that over. Okay, so let's do that. And remember, I want it below Hawaii and above the pineapple. So I might want to come down here and select this top pineapple so that when I bring the flower over, this is the flower that's already been isolated for us. I can go ahead and click on it using the move tool, drag it into my start file, drag it down and bring it down here. Now it's much too big. So again, we're going to do, you know, what we did with a number of other items. I'm going to transform it, Command T to transform. Go down the Shift and Option key, make it a little bit smaller, and then maybe move it into position here, like so. And when I'm satisfied with it, I think it's about the right size, the right position, go ahead and hit the Return key or hit the little checkbox and I'm done. But you'll notice the flower is a little bit more purple. They want it a little bit in this exercise to be a little bit more pink. Well, one of the things that we want to do is to show you that to this particular layer, we can do something that's called, under the layers panel up here, is that we can turn this into a smart object. So I'm going to convert this to a smart object. And sometimes you'll want to do this in order to add adjustments to it. So now what I want to do is let's move my head over here and look at the adjustment layer. I'm going to add one called Hue Saturation. And what I can do with this is I can adjust the hue and watch how dramatically this changes. I can make it look even bluer or more violet by sliding that over, or I can make it look even more pink. Now notice that it's affecting all the layers beneath it. Okay. So let me go back to the original settings here. And let's, I'm going to use the master. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this a little bit, and I'm going to make it a little bit pinker, a little bit more pink. Okay, so I'm adjusting that like so. But notice it's affected the pineapple and everything below it. So if you only want an adjustment, because by nature, adjustment layers only they affect all layers beneath them. If I only want it to affect the layer directly beneath it, then you have to do the following. And this trips some people up once in a while. What you have to do is hold down the Option or Alt key, and you move your mouse between that adjustment layer and the layer that you want affected. So when I do that and I move between the two, notice how the icon changes with a little square box and a little arrow that points down. So when that happens, I click and notice that it now targets just the layer directly beneath it. So it's only affecting the flower itself. And again, if I want to turn it off and go back to the original setting, I can do so. Okay, so now I've done one more thing to this. Lots of things that you can do that are non-destructive, that can be very creative, and sometimes you can kind of go over the top with some of this stuff. There's two more things that we need to do with this. We need to add a border to it, to the overall image, and we need to add some text down here. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to click on this image, and you'll notice that I have, when I select the text tool, when I say cheat, is that what it does when I click on this one, it's telling me what font is chosen. It's Birch Standard, Regular, 32 point, and notice it's using the color that they use. It's that bright green. So now when I go back and I click on my image, let's go ahead and cancel. But when I come back to my image and I select the text tool, that you'll notice that Birch Standard Regular 32 point is still selected. So what I want to do now is I can click anywhere on this screen. I don't have to click beneath the word Hawaii. I can click anywhere. I just want to make sure that it is, let's see where we want. We want to make sure that it's above that hue saturation layer. It can, and probably below the beach scene. So now as soon as I click, you'll notice that a type layer has been added. And that's something to take note of, is that by default, type layers are vector, and anytime you use one, it automatically creates its own layer. And it's one that will allow you to, again, to work non-destructively and edit it almost ad infinitum. So what I'll do now is I'll put caps lock on, and I'm going to type Island Paradise. Okay, and I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. And they already added some features to this. If I go back and I and it's adopting them, something that you might want to take note of is that if I bring up the character panel, so if I come to Window and I bring up Character, you'll notice some things that they added to this, that they added, and we'll talk about type more on another day. But what they did is that they added tracking to this so that it stretches the type out a little bit so that it will be the same width as the word Hawaii. So that's something that you'll want to pay attention to. I'm going to go back to the Move tool, and I'm just going to click and drag and move it into position here. Now, what they did as well to make it pop, because you can see on our version, it blends with the background quite a bit, is that they added a drop shadow, and they also added a bevel and emboss to that. So what I'm going to do under Effects is I'm going to add the drop shadow first. Okay. That's probably a little bit much, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it anyway. And then while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add at the top here, bevel and emboss. And you'll notice that that's a little, what I've done too is probably a little bit over the top as well. The size is 7. We can reduce it a little bit. A depth is 100%. And what that does, that bevel and emboss, it gives it more of a 3-dimensional quality so that it looks, you know, a little bit more physical in its appearance. I should probably go back to the drop shadow though. And I'm going to go ahead and I am going to reduce it a little bit. I'll change the distance just a little bit. I'll change the spread just a little bit. And that looks a little bit more appealing, okay? And that helps the type to pop from that a little bit. So we're almost there, we're almost done. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go to the top and let's see if my approach works to this. I want the border to be on top of everything. So I'm gonna create a brand new layer that goes on top here and we'll call it border. Okay. And let's see if I can apply an effect to that and see if it works. I'm going to apply the stroke. Okay. And so far, nothing, because it's on the outside. But let's put it on the inside and see if that works. And it may not work. So I'm going to have to do it a different way. If I go ahead and I change the size of that, see that? I need something on that layer for that to work. So that's not going to work for me. So I still want it on its own layer. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to select the new layer because I don't want it to affect anything beneath it. And I'm going to hit Command A to select all so that marching ants go around the whole thing. The next step is to go under the Edit menu. And I want to apply a stroke from here that is more permanent. And instead of orange, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to white. So it doesn't matter what color it's on. I just want to make sure that it is totally white. Okay. So I've changed the color. I want to change the width, and again to maybe 3 point. And it's still not visible because it's centered, but let's put it on the inside and see if I can see this. So I'm going to click OK and see if that brings it up, and it does. So if I deselect that by hitting Command D, you can see that the border now has been applied around the outside of my frame without affecting any of the layers beneath it. So I created a brand new layer to do that. Unfortunately, I was unable to use the adjustment layer to do that, or the effects layer, I should say, to do that. But this is kind of an old school way of doing it. As I said, that I created a brand new layer. I hit Command A or Control A if you're on a PC, select it all. And then under Edit, I selected Stroke. And in order for that to be visible, because it's out towards the edge, I need to make sure that it was selected on the inside of it. And then you have to determine the thickness that you want. And that's all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. I'm ready to save this. And I believe we're done. The color of my blue sky is not quite the same as theirs. That would be something that I would probably want to do over again. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much done. We haven't hit the 3 o'clock hour yet, but I've covered all of this in its entirety. Layers, by the way, was added in version 3 of Photoshop. Excuse me, that was over 25 years ago. No, 20 years ago, at least. And that was a really huge enhancement of Photoshop, huge, 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 so that you could work more effectively in a non-destructive way. And then over the years, they've added other features like adjustment layers and things like that so that you could continue to work non-destructively and give yourself various options as you're working on a project of what you want to be visible and what you don't want visible on, work it in any number of different ways. So I'm going to go ahead and save it and see if there's any questions that you guys have. I'm going to do File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a working file. Okay, so this is lesson 4 start. I'll save it in lesson 4 and on my version that I copied, and I will call it working file as a Photoshop document, and I am good to go. So I'm going to pause the recording, and I'm going to ask all of you if there is anything that you would like me to go over and to review. Resume the recording. So Cynthia has a question. If I get the message scratch disks when I open Photoshop, what can you do? So what you need to do is you need to go to Photoshop up here, and you need to go to Preferences, and then you need to come down to, and there should be one for scratch disks, and it's right here. And when that pops up, you need to make sure that your hard drive, or if you have an external drive, is selected. Because it hasn't been much of an issue these days, but for the longest time, Photoshop has been a huge memory hog. And that's what it's hunting for. So if you don't have an external drive, you can't select it. I do. But you want to make sure that your hard drive is selected. If you're working on a computer without a hard drive, then that could present a problem, like a Chromebook. Okay, does that answer your question? Is linking the same as grouping? No, it's not. That's the next question from Natalie. For example, if I want to put, linking actually connects them with one another. Grouping just puts them in the same container. They aren't linked together, but they are grouped together just for visibility. So let's say, for example, I wanted to take the border, the postage, and the gradient and put them all in the same group. So I'll add a group here, and I can click each of these, hold down the Shift key, select all 3, and then click and drag them and put them in that group. And then when I close the group, you can see that they're no longer visible until I twirl down. But if I select, for example, the postage, and I come over here with a move tool, I can move it independently of all the others. It has not grouped them together, or it has not linked them together. On the other hand, if I want to link them together, for example, the postage and the gradient, if I hold down the Command key and I select both of those, and then I link them together, and now I move them. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Let's click in here. Notice that both of those move together, and if I were to rotate them, they would both rotate. If I were to scale them, they would both rotate. So that's the difference. If I want to take these and move them outside of a group, then I can select them individually or collectively and move them outside of that group. Come on. There we go. So now they're outside of the group, and I can take the group and I can just throw it away. Groups are used when you have a large number of layers, and when those layers get really overwhelming, it might behoove you to group some of them together. It might also be the case that if you have a project with multiple variations, that maybe you could have variation 1, and that could be under group 1, or variation 2, and that could be under folder 2, and so on. So you really have multiple documents contained in one that you can turn on and off at will. So that would be the reason for doing that. Well, everything has been deleted from the computer, Cynthia. I'm going to turn off the recording here.